Hello, my name is Raj K and I'm going to be taking you through the EOS R5. I've been doing some videos here on the WEX channel throughout all of the lockdowns, and this time I'm going to be taking you through a more product focused video all about Canon's newest full frame mirrorless body. The R5 being Canon's top of the range pro spec model mirrorless body. This video is going to be mostly centered around why I won't be shooting on a digital SLR probably ever again, and why mirrorless bodies are fundamentally that much better. If you haven't seen any of my other videos, I am primarily a portrait photographer. I do portraits and sort of event photography, but I also dabble in a lot of other genres of photography too. In this video, I am going to be centering this around portraiture, and I'm going to do some simple natural light portraiture in the home. Mostly natural light, there's some fairy lights involved. So I've got my partner, Jade, who is also a model and photographer, and we're going to do some stuff here. So we'll get set up for that, and I'll take you through some of my favourite parts of these cameras. This is Jade, if you haven't already met her from our previous videos. Jade is my in-house model. We live together, she's my partner, and so we're all COVID secure. What we've done is we've set up a canvas backdrop behind us. It's a little bit blown out in this light, but that is a really cheapo dust sheet from B&Q. I spent maybe a £5, if we're really pushing the budget, £10. And that is, you know, it looked a bit like a Hessian sack type material. I thought it looked lovely for some, I hesitate to say it, fine art type portraiture. So if you take a seat and we can show you the setup. So what we've done is we've set up the Hessian background to the side on to the light. So the windows are over there and they're coming across Jade. That's giving a bit of a directional light. There's a bit of sunlight popping through the clouds every now and again, so it might look a little bit blown out in this image. And just to diffuse the light, I've just closed our blinds. We have these white blinds, and that diffuses the light really nicely. If you don't have blinds, you could very easily do this with a large reflector. If you just take off a 5-in-1 reflector, if you take off the sort of shiny bits, it tends to have a diffusion panel on the inside. Put that up, you could use that. Or you could just use a bed sheet as a diffusion panel as well. Any of those sort of things work. It's all going to be natural light in this image. There is a LED panel on at the moment. That's just to illuminate me so that there's not too much of a difference. In terms of camera settings, I am going to be shooting in fully manual.
It's like sometimes it's like just little fluffy dogs are running through your brain. It's like, right, she's disappeared right now, and we're back.
You're not wrong, there's often fluffy dogs running around in my brain. In terms of camera settings, I'll be using fully manual. I'll be doing everything in fully manual, and if you've seen my other videos, I'm sure you're sick of me saying that I shoot everything in fully manual. But I just find it's the best way to do things. You get full creative control, and the camera isn't, you know, doing things you're not expecting it to, because it can't. That being said, the R5 does have a suite of very clever metering systems and focusing systems, which we are going to try and take advantage of a little bit, particularly the focusing system. What I've done is I've set up the camera shooting into EOS utility on my computer. By doing that, I'm going to screen record the monitor. That way you can see what the camera is focusing on and how I'm changing settings as I'm doing it. That'll give you a little bit better idea rather than me trying to show you on the back of the camera screen. It might look a little bit clearer. I'm going to be shooting on the 85mm f2. This is the RF version of this lens, so it's effectively the replacement to the EF 85 1.8. And I've had a play with this once before and I've already been very impressed, but this will be a pretty good test of just how sharp and how amazing this lens is. It's a f2 macro IS STM, so it's closer focusing distance than the previous generation of this lens. That means we're going to be able to get a little bit closer. It's good for sort of beauty detail and that sort of thing. I don't tend to work quite that close up, but you can imagine for a wedding photographer and other types of portraiture, this will be very, very useful because you've got a very versatile type of lens then. We've got the ISO set to 100 at the moment, and I'm shooting at f3.2. I'm going to probably brighten that up and go for a slightly shallower depth of field than that. The only other setting I haven't mentioned is white balance. I'll be shooting with a set Kelvin white balance. What I don't want is the camera changing the white balance between images as the exposure changes, because then when I bring it into the computer, I'm going to have slightly different colors for every single image. So I set it to a set Kelvin value, and that way it's consistent throughout. Even if the light changes a little bit, it doesn't really matter. I then have a much easier job editing my images. I've currently got it set to 7,200 Kelvin, which is probably a little bit too warm, considering Jade's already wearing quite warm colours, and this is sort of a warm looking image. I do want a little bit more of a warm final image, but with white balance you kind of want to get it to technically correct, you know, and then do the colour grading afterwards in post-production, rather than using the white balance for creative control in camera. You can do that, I just find that you get a little bit more information and a little bit more play with it in post-production if you get the white balance correct in camera. So I'm going to change the white balance now to something a bit cooler, so probably 5,400 Kelvin. That's probably a little bit more correct for daylight. And then lovely. That's beautiful. Looking great. So just be careful of sort of shadows coming into the side because it's very cross lighting. So yeah, a bit more like that. And that eye's a bit dark.
Okay.
The R5 is equipped with Canon's spectacular dual pixel autofocusing system. In the R5 it's dual pixel AF2, so this is the second iteration of it. And it improves on it in many ways. It's able to focus on the eyes of many animals like birds, cats and dogs, but most importantly for me, humans. And it can track the face, and what it does differently to previous generations like on the EOS R is, you know, if you're getting the face kind of turned away, it can still track the eye to a much further degree than previous generation, but also if it loses the eye it then goes onto the face. And if it loses the face, then it goes onto the head, and it'll even track the back of someone's head. So it's quite useful because you know it's going to be focusing on the subject rather than suddenly jumping onto the background. And if you're going for slightly unusual compositions, that's really quite useful. I have changed the setting in my camera compared to what it is out of the factory though, in that I pick my initial start point. So you'll notice as I point the camera towards Jade here, the camera isn't focusing because I'm not pressing anything. As soon as I put the box over Jade and press the AF on button, it starts to track that eye. And just turn away. The advantage of doing this is I can use it to track individual objects, so I can press on that and it'll track that leaf. So compared to not having an initial start point set up, the camera can sort of pick up on anything it decides on, or it will pick up a face if it sees one. With this, I'm able to pick the face that I want it to track, and it's a little bit easier. So I'll show you a little bit later on how to set that up in the camera settings as well. Let's get some nice pictures. Do you want to just take a little step away from the background?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks really lovely. Yeah, that's perfect. Because we've got quite a strong side light coming onto Jade, one thing that's worth being quite aware of is the shadows on her left side of her face. So if Jade turns slightly away from the window, we get quite a dark left eye. And you get quite a moody image, but it sort of loses the catchlightness in her eyes and it doesn't look quite right. So what we can do is just ask Jade to tilt slightly towards the window for me, and you're going to get a much softer, beautiful light across the face. And you can, if you turn slightly more towards me, you get more of a Rembrandt type look. So you get this kind of little triangle of light under her eye that's away from the light source. And you get some really beautiful, quite painterly looking images. And you'll notice something I haven't directed Jade to do, but she's automatically moved her body around towards the window light. That way, you know, we're getting a nice soft light across her body, and it's creating shape. So by having the window light off to the side, we're creating this sort of nice shadow on this side of Jade, and that's what really gives you the sort of the depth to the image. Let's get some close-ups. Looking off towards the window. And something you'll notice that from the footage of the focusing system doing its thing is that it's nearly always focusing on the near eye. So it recognizes both eyes are there, but it's trying to pick out the one that's closest to you. Because as a portrait photographer, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that near eye to be in focus. And this is primarily why I won't be shooting on a digital SLR ever again, because with this system, I'm able to get the near eye in focus and it's pin sharp every time. And my hit rate of the images that are actually usable is considerably higher than it was with a digital SLR. Because when you're working with very shallow depths of field, like you will be with an 85mm lens shooting wide open, that depth of field is so small that sometimes the eyelashes would be in focus or her cheek would be in focus, but the eye wouldn't be. And with this system, because it's able to recognize the eyes and pick out the eye, I know it's always going to be in focus. And it just means it's one less thing for me to think about. I don't have to think about focusing anymore, really. I can just think about composition, Jade's expression, her posing, that sort of thing, and then think more about the image I'm creating rather than fighting a tool to do its job. Okay. Yeah, I can get to your... Actually, I can get just past them. Okay, let's get some props in. Which one would you like? Jade's doing her silent movie thing. She doesn't make noises while she's videoing. You can be heard on this microphone. Yeah. By bringing in some props, especially if you're not working with an experienced model, by having something for them to interact with, and maybe even not even look at the camera, just interact with the prop, it can make people feel a little bit more at ease, and you get a little bit more of a natural looking image. It is a fake flower though, so it's not going to smell very nice. Oh, that's quite cool. And you know, having a little bit more, having an extra element like a prop in the image allows you a little bit more chance of creating a bit more of storytelling, as well as creating a little bit more depth within the image, because you can use that to create a little bit of a shallow depth of field in the foreground. So Jay could perhaps point the flower towards me in a very Instagrammy kind of way. Yeah, that kind of thing. Go on then, let's give it a go. Something Jade just pointed out to me is I'm not leaving enough headroom above her head in some of these images. So I'm not thinking about my output when I'm creating these compositions. It's something to really think about, because these images are most likely to end up on Instagram where it crops a little bit tighter. So you want to leave a little bit more headroom so your composition still looks pretty much how you wanted it once it's cropped down on Instagram. I've just changed my aperture down to f4.5 from about f2.8 I was on, I think. And the reason being, you know, there's not that much in this image. I kind of want more of Jade in focus, so I want both of her eyes to be in focus in the image. So I'm just creating a little bit more depth. And I don't really want to push the ISO up too much, so I've lowered my shutter speed to about a 50th of a second. Ordinarily, I wouldn't do this on an 85mm lens because, you know, the conventional wisdom is that you should keep your shutter speed at 1/over the focal length of your lens. So, you know, around 100th of a second would be ideal for an 85mm lens, or 1/80th of a second, that type of thing. When you move up to super high resolution bodies, like the 45 megapixel sensor in this, I'd say anything over 30 megapixels, that wisdom has to be doubled, because every movement that you make is amplified onto the sensor. So vibration or camera shake is kind of amplified. So suddenly you're talking about 160th of a second when you're shooting on an 85mm lens. And I don't have particularly steady hands. So I used to have to do that when I was shooting on the 5D Mark IV. In this, because my lens has image stabilization and the camera body has image stabilization, and they work in tandem, I'm able to get up to 8 stops of image stabilization. So I should be able to get a much sharper image and just keep my ISO even lower while slowing down my shutter speed a little bit more. And as Jade is pretty stationary, I don't need to worry about her moving too much. So stay still. Because when working in quite a tight space, sometimes I need to put the camera where I can't also be. That's why having these tilty vari-angle screens makes a huge difference. I can put the camera up here and then I can tilt the screen so I can see it and I can still shoot. It just means a lot more flexibility for shooting at home, as we're all doing at the moment. All right, so we've moved upstairs. We have this daybed set up here with a mosquito net.
Canopy,
princess canopy up here. And we've got some fairy lights. We just generally have this bed set up here for shoots, as Jade does remote shoots from home. If you're interested, a little plug. We've also got some fairy lights and a few little props. And we've gone for a little bit of a retro setup up here. I don't know why, I just like colourful things, it just looks cool. Again, in this one we're going to be using window light, but because up here it's a bit darker, I have this large reflector set up to bounce some light back into Jade. It doesn't look like it's perhaps doing a lot, but it is just making it less harsh in the sense that, you know, what happens is you get this quite a harsh shadow on this side of Jade without that reflector. And I do quite like a moody look, but as we're going for sort of retro and bright and colourful, it's not really what I'm going for. The white balance up here is slightly different. It's a bit cooler up here because it's getting a bit darker. So I've just upped it to 6,500 Kelvin, roughly. And again, this is just for consistency, because the light isn't going to change a great deal while we're up here shooting. So I might as well get consistent results. And while we're up here, I'll just tell you a few things I particularly like about this camera that are quite similar to some digital SLRs. It has the dual card slot option on there, so you're going to get the option to back up your images if you're shooting weddings, and we do shoot weddings together, so that's quite an important factor for us. And it has a new battery, so throughout filming all of this, I've been using a single battery, and believe me, there was a lot more than I've shown you on this video, because I have to take about 1,000 takes to do anything in this video. And I've not had to change the battery once, which is fantastic. So it's a slightly higher capacity version of the LPE6. Same battery as Canon have been using on the 5D Mark IV, 7D Mark II, you know, 80Ds, 90Ds. It's a very common battery for Canon. It's the same format, it's just a higher capacity version, and it's backwards compatible. So when I had my 5D Mark IV, I could use the battery from this in that no problem. And I'm using one of the high capacity batteries in the EOS R that's filming right now, so that we get a little bit more run time. And ergonomically, it's very familiar if you're used to using a digital SLR. That is something that a lot of people that use digital SLRs had a bit of trouble with the first few EOS R series cameras, was that they're a little bit different and a little bit trickier to get used to and not quite as intuitive. They have gone back and kind of really rethought it, and it feels very much like using a 5D Mark IV, really. In fact, you get an extra dial compared to the 5D Mark IV. So I have one wheel there for shutter speed, one there for ISO, and then one there for my aperture. So everything's at hand really, really quickly. And I do also have the joystick that was missing. So Jade has the EOS R, and she has, what do you call it, the little touchy bar thing, multifunction bar. What did you think about the multifunction bar? Did you like it?
It's new, and
it takes some
it takes some getting used to. So I just find out actually I don't use it.
So that seems to be the prevailing response to the touch bar. Some people liked it, but most people didn't end up using it very often because it was quite different to what they were used to. So the sort of novelty wore off quite quick.
We're in matching outfits.
We're in matching outfits! Look at that! That wasn't planned. I'm using the 24-70 f2.8, the RF version, and I'm just photographing Jade, sort of shooting along from a similar direction to where the light's coming from. And what I'm going to do is just take a few nice pictures like this, and then I'm going to bring in some fairy lights to create a little bit more depth. That's cool. I'll use a shape zoom lens. What do you think? Something people often neglect is foreground interest, and particularly when you're getting that sort of out of focus bokeh type look, the foreground is often ignored. The background is often, you know, all sparkly and beautiful, but there's nothing in between you and the model, and there's, you know, I feel like that's a little bit of a wasted opportunity to create more depth, because what we can do is we can put some of these fairy lights in front of Jade. She can hold on to them, she can play with them. That will create a nice bit of foreground interest. and we can even go a little bit further and do a bit of an Instagram thing and just have the lights coming straight towards me. So we can almost wrap them around the lens and just hook them into the, no, we can't. I was just thinking we could hook them under the lens hood. That might be useful. If it was actually locked in place, we could. Oh, you pull that. That's cool. So what we're doing is getting some nice out of focus stuff quite close to the lens, and if you use a fixed focal length lens like a 50mm or an 85mm, you can go to a even wider aperture and you'll get it even more out of focus and it'll look even cooler. Unfortunately, I don't have a 50mm lens at the moment and I need to use the 35 on that camera. So I've just swapped over to the 35 1.8 RF and put the 24-70 that I was shooting on the camera that's filming. And that's to allow me to get a little bit shallower depth of field. Now, using a wider lens, a wider focal length is going to inhibit you getting a shallow depth of field a little bit. It's a little bit harder to get it with a wide lens. But having a bigger aperture, so a 1.8 rather than a 2.8, is going to help me. The other thing that really helps is your distance to subject. So my being quite close to Jade and the background being quite far away means the background is going to be quite blurry. Likewise, having the fairy lights really close to the lens makes them quite blurry relative to Jade. But if I was much further back, even a couple of meters back with the same lens, even at 1.8, everything's still going to be pretty much in focus. So my distance to subject makes a huge difference with the depth of field. So now I've gone back to the 85mm and I'll show you how much of a difference it makes with depth of field and that look. Just brought in a telephone, let's say Teflon then. I've just brought in a telephone, retro looking telephone that Jade bought recently for a shoot. And I think it's just, oh, is it? Oh, it's Canon. Oh, they're telling me I don't have a job anymore. Yes, I like to bring a little bit of storytelling into the images, and by bringing in some props and getting the model to, or your subject to act out some sort of scene, just brings in a little bit more action into an image, and also, as I said before, makes people that are not experienced models look a lot more at ease and comfortable with being on camera if they're just performing an action. It doesn't have to be acting, you don't have to be gunning for an Oscar, but just by interacting with something else just makes people feel a little bit more comfortable. I'm not looking at the camera here, that's great. I said not gunning for an Oscar.
Was that Oscar worthy? worthy.
Not even close. Looking through. That's great. I'll do it. That's a wrap! One thing I haven't mentioned yet in this video is the performance of EF lenses on the R system when you're using the adapter. So the EF lenses are those lenses that are designed for the digital SLRs. If you already have a Canon camera, you undoubtedly already have some EF lenses, or EFS lenses even. And with the adapter you can use those lenses on the RF mount system. There is no disadvantage to doing this. You don't lose any light, you don't lose any focusing ability. In fact, the performance you get out of your current lenses actually improves when you bring them over to the R system. They focus faster, they focus more accurately. And that is down to how dual pixel AF works differently to how a through the viewfinder focusing system works on a digital SLR. Quite a few digital SLRs do use dual pixel AF, but only when you go into live view. So if you're using the viewfinder on a 5D Mark IV, for example, you have a series of mirrors and the focusing system's at the bottom. On the R system, the focusing system is on the sensor. Every pixel is a focusing point, effectively. Because what dual pixel does is it splits every individual pixel into 2 photo sites. So you have 2 photo sites and 1 micro lens over every pixel. And by having that, you're able to have effectively a left and right eye, and then you can measure distances and you can focus using that distance information. And by being able to do that on every point, you're not replacing individual pixels with phase detection points, and you're not using a contrast-based system. Because the issue with contrast-based systems is when it gets to low light, you can really struggle to get any contrast. Everything sort of starts to look the same. With this dual pixel system, you get the accuracy of contrast-based and the speed of phase detection, and it works in incredibly low light. On the R5, you're looking at -6 EV, and on the R6, you're looking at -6.5 EV. To give you a reference, -3 EV is moonlight, -4 EV is starlight. -6 EV takes the human eye about a minute to adjust to. That's how low light we're talking. So for wedding photographers and event photographers, people that are going to be photographing tricky situations where the light is changing a lot or you just don't have a lot, you can continue like it's daylight. It's just fantastic. Another thing I haven't really talked about on the R5 is its video spec and capabilities. The R5 is capable of 8K raw footage, 8K non-raw as well, 4K and 4K slow-mo, so 120 frames a second in 4K, which is kind of nuts. It can do all of that without crop, and it can do that while focusing as well. So all the tracking, focusing capabilities, you can do that in any video mode. So it's really, really, really capable. And that dual pixel AF system for video is just superb. You know, being able to track a subject and then touch on another one and get this lovely pull focus effect. It makes it very easy to make really top level quality filmmaking. For 8K RAW, you will need to be using the CF Express card slot. One of the 2 card slots on the R5 is a CF Express. CF Express is a slightly more expensive format, but it's a lot faster, and it is the prevailing newer technology for cards. A lot of the other brands are also using it, which will inevitably bring down the price as more cards will be being manufactured by a lot more brands. Lastly, I guess, is image quality. I kind of didn't want to like the R5 as much as I do. I wanted to spend my money on the R6. However, having had the R5 for a little while and having played with it, and the R6, having all of that resolution is just something else. The R5 performs very well in low light. The noise levels are incredibly well controlled, especially for something that's such a high resolution body. More than capable for sort of low light wedding photography and press photography type situations, while having all of that resolution. And the other thing is the dynamic range is pretty spectacular. So there's just a lot of play there, and the colors are fantastic. It's really a joy to use this camera. There's so much play in the images. If you happen to mess up a little bit or parts of the images look blown, the information is probably still there. There's just so much dynamic range. So I've got an image open that I took on the R5 quite a while back, in between lockdowns, and it's not that harsh an image in terms of dynamic range, but it just to give you an idea of how much I can pull back here. If I bring down the highlights, all of the information in the clouds are there. I can pull up the shadows, and there's just oodles of information, and I can zoom in and you can see it just holds up really, really well. There's no need to worry about sort of the image degrading by doing any of that. It's really great. Yeah, I probably wouldn't edit it like that, but it just gives you an idea of how much information is there to play with. So this makes this camera suitable for pretty much everything. It's very much a do-everything kind of camera. Something I've always hesitated in recommending is high-resolution bodies for wildlife photography, because when you're using really long lenses, your camera shake is amplified onto the sensor, and when you're using a high-resolution body, that camera shake is amplified even more. But with the IS built into the body, even for wildlife photographers, this is a cracking option, and then it gives you that extra capabilities to crop into the image. I would say, however, the R6 is also very, very capable for wildlife photography, and it has a little bit better low light performance. So it's up to you whether you really need to go for 45 megapixels or you want the slightly better low light performance of the R6 for wildlife photography particularly. That's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I will leave a slideshow of images to play through for about 10 minutes so that you can ask me any questions in the live chat. I'm also on Instagram at rajk.photo, so you can always send me a message on there if you don't have a chance to ask me a question on here. Thank you very much for watching. Stay safe. Goodbye.